dog didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood there, stone still, muscles coiled tight beneath his damp coat, ears forward, eyes locked on the rusted side door of the old Riverside textile plant. Lieutenant Ethan Cole gave the leash a tug. Nothing. "Ranger," he said again, voice low against the wind. "Come on, partner. Let's go." The German shepherd didn't so much as twitch. Rain hissed against the broken window panes above them, slanting sideways in the bitter wind. The factory loomed like a carcass at the edge of the industrial district, its roof sagging, bricks mottled with mildew and graffiti. Most of Riverside had forgotten the building existed, but Ranger hadn't. Ethan wiped water from his brow and looked down. The dog was listening, not distracted, listening like something beneath the concrete wanted to be heard. "What is it, boy?" Ranger exhaled a breath, slow and steady, almost like a sigh. Then his hackles lifted, not violently, but in a line, one that ran with purpose. He took a single step forward and placed his front paw against the base of the door, claws clicking against metal. He didn't scratch. He didn't push. He just held it there, the same way a person might lay a hand on a coffin. Ethan felt it before he understood it, the prickling chill that climbs your spine when instinct outruns reason. This wasn't about sheltering from the storm. He reached for the door handle, but it didn't give. Locked from the inside. Thunder rolled low in the distance, deep and patient. The city radio squawked softly in his patrol vest, dispatch reporting a downed tree on I-77. Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at Ranger. The dog had never frozen like this before. He'd faced riots, narcotics raids, a burning gas station, always in motion, always fluid. But this was different. Ranger turned his head just enough to meet Ethan's eyes. He held the gaze for half a second, long enough to pass something unspoken between them, then looked back at the door. That's when Ethan heard it. Faint, muffled. A knock. No, not a knock. A tap. A weak, irregular tap, like fingertips, like someone trying not to be loud. He stepped back, breath catching. There was no reason, none, that sound should be coming from inside a sealed, abandoned textile factory. He keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Cole. I need backup at the old Blackstone mill, corner of Ridge and Marlowe. Something's not right." "Copy that, Lieutenant. ETA for Unit 7 is 9 minutes. Ranger growled. Not loud, not aggressive, just a low vibration in his chest. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. 9 minutes is too long." He circled the side of the building, Ranger glued to his flank, tail down but moving like a sensor, sweeping side to side. They passed a shattered loading dock, a burnt-out forklift, a steel door partially welded shut with rust. Then the dog stopped again. A second door. Narrower, bent at the hinges. Ranger stepped, forward, nose to the seam. He sniffed once, then braced his body and pushed his shoulder to the gap. It didn't open, but it gave just enough to creak. Ethan drew his sidearm. "I'm going in," he said aloud. "If someone's hurt in there—" He didn't finish the sentence. The lock was weak. A swift kick from his boot cracked the old frame. The door swung inward with a screech, revealing blackness and dust. Ranger didn't wait. He stepped in first, low and careful, head turning in tight arcs. Ethan followed. The inside smelled of rust and wet stone with something else underneath. Something acrid, faintly organic. He swept his flashlight across the floor. Broken pallets, molded boxes. A child's shoe. Ethan froze. A child's shoe. Too clean. Too new. He moved quickly, light arcing to the far wall. Stacks of crates, thick rope, a dented thermos, and then a handprint. Small. Too small for an adult. Pressed into the grime on the cement wall, fingers splayed, palms smeared. Ranger stepped to the right and let out a sudden, sharp bark. One bark. It echoed off the walls like a verdict. Ethan rushed over. The dog was pawing gently at a patch of flooring that looked like all the others, until you looked closer. A faint square in the concrete. A trap door. The outline had been swept over, disguised with grime and soot. But Ranger found it. He always did. Ethan crouched, heart pounding. He hooked his fingers under the edge and pulled. The panel lifted an inch, then more. It gave with a groan like a ship hull under stress. The air that rose from below hit him like a wave. Damp, stale, and something else. Desperation. "Jesus," he whispered. Ranger didn't hesitate. He stepped to the edge and looked down into the darkness, ears alert. He growled again, but this time it wasn't warning. It was grief. Then came the sound. A whisper. So soft Ethan thought he imagined it. But Ranger turned sharply toward it, confirming what Ethan couldn't yet believe. A child's voice. Then another. Then tapping. 20 voices wouldn't scream anymore. They had learned better. But they could still hope someone was listening. And tonight, someone was. Or rather, some dog. The backup arrived to find Ethan Cole covered in dirt, standing at the mouth of a hidden staircase, and a K9 dog who refused to come up. Because someone was still down there, because someone still needed him, and until they were safe, he wasn't going anywhere. They said you don't really choose a K9 partner. The dog chooses you. And in Ethan Cole's case, that felt less like a saying and more like a moment he could still remember by sound. Not the bark, the silence. 3 years ago, Ethan had been back from his second deployment, tired, tight wound, a shadow behind the badge. His older brother, Caleb, had been a Marine medic, killed in Helmand Province by a roadside bomb. Ethan, then a military police officer stationed nearby, had been the one to zip up the body bag. That was the moment the noise in his life had changed. It didn't go louder. It just never turned off. He came back home to Riverside, took the job with the department, buried the grief in paperwork and the 12-hour shifts. His world was uniform and expected, until Captain Rivera asked if he'd consider joining the K9 unit. "You need a reason to stay grounded," Rivera said. "He needs a reason to trust again." The he was a German shepherd named Ranger, a military working dog, Afghanistan veteran, retired early after losing his handler to sniper fire outside Kabul. Ranger had been stateside for months, evaluated, cleared, and then sent from kennel to kennel, like a war hero with no parade and no place to land. Ethan remembered the first time they met. The training officer warned him, "Don't reach for him. Just walk in, sit down, and wait." So Ethan did. He stepped into the dusty yard behind the station, where Ranger sat beneath a lean-to roof. No leash, no commands, just those yellow-brown eyes watching every breath. Ethan sat down on the opposite side of the space, rested his elbows on his knees, and said nothing. Ranger didn't move. They stayed like that for 8 minutes. A soft breeze rattled the old fence, and a bird skittered across the tin roof. Then, without ceremony, Ranger stood up, crossed the dirt, and sat at Ethan's feet, not seeking attention, not performing, just choosing. From that day forward, they moved as one. Ranger didn't take to loud orders. He didn't respond well to high-pressure drills or sharp whistles. But with Ethan, he didn't need those things. A hand signal, a glance, a breath shifting, that was enough. Ethan learned Ranger's language, quiet, efficient, deliberate. It wasn't just barking or pointing or sitting. It was the way his ears moved, how his shoulders tensed just before he shifted weight, how he froze with a front paw lifted when something was wrong. They ran narcotics busts, high-risk warrants, crowd control, but what Ranger excelled at wasn't aggression. It was intuition. He could feel danger before it took form. During a domestic violence call last winter, Ethan had entered a trailer expecting a simple welfare check. The suspect wasn't in the system, no priors. Everything looked quiet. until Ranger refused to move past the kitchen threshold. Ethan trusted him, and 5 seconds later, a man with a knife burst from behind the laundry door. Ranger took him down without drawing blood. Clean. Surgical. That was how it worked. Ethan trusted Ranger, and Ranger trusted no one else, but the bond ran deeper than tactics. Some nights, Ethan would fall asleep on the old recliner in his den, the television on mute, Caleb's dog tags hanging from the wall. He'd wake up to find Ranger curled near the front door, his body positioned between Ethan and the world. Once, during a thunderstorm, lightning split a tree behind their house. The blast rattled the windows, shook the whole foundation. Ethan jolted awake, breath clipped. The room flickered with a memory he couldn't shake. In the quiet that followed, he found Ranger standing beside him, not licking, not whining, just there, just present. His presence said, "I've been through storms too." That night, Ethan slept on the floor beside him, and then there were the flashbacks. They didn't come often, but when they did, Ethan never had to explain. Ranger knew. He'd place a paw on Ethan's leg, breathe with him, guide him back, second by second. They were both trained in discipline, both shaped by war, and both broken in places no one could see. But side by side, they worked, which is why, tonight, back in the squad car after the factory discovery, Ethan didn't say a word. Ranger lay in the back seat, but his eyes hadn't blinked since they left. His ears kept angling toward the road behind them, and every time a car passed, his body tensed as if waiting for the wrong sound. Ethan pulled into the precinct lot, but didn't kill the engine. The windshield wipers ticked softly, swaying rain into ripples on the glass. He looked at the rearview mirror. Ranger stared back. "Yeah," Ethan said finally. "I heard it too." Then his phone buzzed. A text from Captain Rivera. "Call me. Now." Ethan picked up, heart already tightening. Rivera answered before the first ring ended. "Someone's been in that factory recently." "What do you mean?" "The building was decommissioned 3 years ago, right?" "Yeah." "Then why was a fresh delivery schedule just pulled from the printer in the loading office, time-stamped 2 nights ago, and it references cargo numbers from a private rail company?" Ethan sat up straighter. "Rail?" he asked. "Yeah." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Ranger growled from the back seat. A single, low sound. Ethan didn't need any more. He opened the door. Ranger was already standing. Whatever was inside that building, it wasn't abandoned. It was operational, and someone had just tried to keep 20 children from ever being found. Not on Ranger's watch. Not tonight. Not ever. It was nearly midnight when they returned to the factory. Rain had turned the lot into mud, and the old metal siding groaned with every gust of wind. Ethan had no warrant, no partner on duty, no one on the radio. Just a gut feeling and a dog who refused to let the silence lie. Ranger jumped from the cruiser before Ethan had fully opened the door. His nose was down instantly, sweeping the concrete in zigzags like a forensic map only he could read. His body moved with intent, not panic. He was searching, not for scent, but for confirmation. Ethan watched him circle the building's perimeter twice. Then the shepherd halted, exactly where he had before. The side door, hinges rusted, frame buckled, paint blistered from years of Ohio summers and snow melt. Ranger stepped forward, nose pressed to the seam. He didn't bark, just let out a breath, deep and sharp. Then came a low, almost inaudible rumble from his chest. Ethan crouched beside him, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. "Still on that door, huh?" he murmured. "Probably a possum nesting under the flooring, or a stray cat. Maybe both." Ranger didn't move. "Come on, buddy. You're chasing ghosts tonight." But Ethan didn't believe it. Not fully. He had worked with Ranger long enough to know the difference between curiosity and conviction. This wasn't a scent trail. This was a signal. Still, his rational side needed something more. something concrete, so he stepped forward and tested the handle again. Locked, just like before. Ranger backed up 3 paces and sat. His eyes stayed on the door. "Fine," Ethan muttered. "Let's check around back." He motioned, and Ranger obeyed, but not happily. His movement stayed tight, low, ears flicking backward as if tethered to that spot. They circled past a rusted fire escape and found a rust-covered panel door half concealed behind an old dumpster. The ground near it was packed tight, weeds flattened unnaturally. Ethan stepped closer, crouched low, and scanned the door frame. That's when he saw it. Scrape marks. Not fresh, but recent enough. Maybe from boots, maybe from crates, maybe both. He looked back at Ranger, who was now stock still, tail low, ears forward, focused like a sniper. A soft whine slipped out. Ethan's skin prickled. "You smell it." Ranger's gaze didn't waver. A long breath came from his chest, followed by a bark, sharp and singular. Then another. Ethan reached for the latch. This one wasn't locked, but stuck. Years of disuse had swollen the wood and warped the metal. He wedged a crowbar into the gap and leaned hard. The door groaned open with a scream. Inside, the smell hit him like a shovel. Not rot, not mold, bleach, a cover-up. Ethan stepped inside, flashlight tracing the room. Stained walls, stacks of wooden pallets, coils of rope hung neatly from rusted nails, an overturned mop bucket in the corner, its contents long dried, and a single shoe. Small, canvas, blue with a white stripe, a child's shoe. The air behind him shifted. Ranger entered, slow and purposeful. His paws made no sound. He paused, nose lifting toward the ceiling, then the floor. Then he moved straight to the far wall and stopped. Head low, tail stiff. He placed his front paw on the floorboard and growled. Ethan swept the light down. The concrete was uneven there, poured in patches. Sloppy work. He stepped closer and tapped his boot on the floor. A hollow echo answered. He crouched, pressed his palm flat against the cement. A vibration, subtle, almost imagined. Then came the sound. Tap, tap, then silence. Then another tap. Fingertips, or maybe knuckles, trying not to be loud. Ethan froze. His heart climbed into his throat. He looked at Ranger. The shepherd was locked in place, eyes drilling into the floor like he could see through it. Ethan rose, backed away. "We need to get in here," he said aloud. "To no one in particular. Tonight." He turned toward the exit, then stopped. Outside the doorway, barely illuminated by the weak parking light, stood a woman. Mid-30s. Hood up, shoulders hunched. She held something in her hand. Ethan reached for his badge instinctively. "Ma'am, this is an active scene. I need you to back up." The woman didn't move. She held out the object, a folded piece of paper. Ethan approached slowly, Ranger close behind. The woman didn't speak. She handed over the note and walked off into the dark, shoes whispering through the gravel. Gone before he could ask a question. Ethan opened the note. 3 words, written in pencil. "Check the hatch." Ranger barked once behind him. Ethan spun. The floorboard where Ranger had stood was now vibrating audibly, a soft, rhythmic beat from underneath. He dropped to his knees, pressed his ear to the ground. A voice, not clear, not loud, but there, a child's voice, whispering, hope. Ranger sat beside him, pressing his body close, not for warmth, but to say, "I told you." And this time, Ethan didn't argue. "You're telling me you broke into a condemned building at midnight, based on your dog refusing to move?" Sergeant Donnelly's voice cut through the squad room like a straight razor. It wasn't loud, but sharp, the kind of tone that said patience was a luxury he had already run out of. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the wall where the old city map hung, curling at the edges. Ethan stood in front of the desk, rain still drying on his uniform, boots leaving damp prints on the tile. Ranger sat by his side, calm but alert, his ears tilting every few seconds toward the hallway, like he expected to be called back into the field at any second. Ethan kept his voice steady. "I didn't break in. The side panel was already loose. The interior wasn't secure. You entered without a warrant, alone, after hours, and then reported hearing what exactly?" "Sounds. Under the floor. Possibly children. There was a shoe sergeant, a small one, clean and bleach. The place reeked of it." Donnelly exhaled through his nose. "And you didn't find anything else?" "Number, not yet." He hesitated. Donnelly caught it. "Not yet," the sergeant repeated, eyebrows rising. "Cole, you want me to open an entire department inquiry based on a smell and a bark? You want to pull in crime scene, judges, media heat, all because your dog got spooked by an echo?" Ranger's eyes flicked toward the desk. Not defensive, just watching, waiting. Ethan didn't answer, because the truth, what he felt in his bones, wasn't something you could write in a report. Donnelly leaned back in his chair and dropped the folder onto the desk with a slap. "We don't need ghost hunts, Cole. We need results, traffic stops, gun arrests, patrol presence, not midnight trips to places the city already condemned." Ethan clenched his jaw. "So you want me to ignore it?" "I want you to use your judgment, the judgment we pay you for. A child's shoe in a dirty factory doesn't mean a crime has occurred. You think every squat in Shadow's a case now." The air felt heavier than it should have. "I'll file the visit as an unofficial welfare check," Donnelly continued, "but I want you off that property unless you have paper in hand. Clear?" Ethan didn't respond right away. Ranger stood slowly, as if reading something Ethan hadn't said aloud. "Clear," Ethan muttered. Donnelly nodded once. "Then get home. You look like you're about to punch the wall." Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The pavement still glistened, puddles reflecting the amber glow of street lamps. The cruiser sat quiet in the lot. Ethan opened the rear door for Ranger. The dog didn't get in. He stood on the sidewalk, body angled east. Toward the factory. Toward the dark. "Let's go," Ethan said. "That's an order." Ranger didn't move. "Not tonight," Ethan added. "Quieter now. We're done." He tried to keep his voice flat, but something cracked in the middle of it. Ranger caught it. The shepherd stepped forward, slowly, reluctantly, and climbed into the car. They drove in silence. Ethan didn't turn on the radio, didn't touch the dashboard. The rain on the windshield from earlier had dried in streaks, catching the glow from passing headlights. Ranger didn't lie down. He just sat, staring out the window, posture tight, as if leaving the factory had left something in him unfinished. At the precinct garage, Ethan parked. He reached to unclip Ranger's harness, but the dog was already out, leaping to the asphalt before Ethan could stop him. "Ranger, hey!" Ethan called. But the shepherd didn't head for the kennel. He trotted toward the gate, then beyond it. Then he turned around and looked back at Ethan. Just stood there, waiting. Ethan followed slowly. They reached the sidewalk. Ranger walked ahead without a leash, keeping just far enough to test the bond. He made no noise, just moved with purpose. The factory was 7 blocks away. Ethan didn't plan to follow him all the way, but his legs did. They reached the edge of the lot. The place looked even more hollow than it had before. Broken windows glared back like sockets. The whole structure leaned but didn't fall. Ranger didn't approach the door. He lay down, right there on the gravel. He placed his head on his paws and stared at the door. Ethan looked at his watch. Midnight again. The hour where everything quiet pretends to be harmless. "You think they're still in there?" Ethan said softly. Ranger didn't blink. "I don't know what to do with that." The dog lifted his head slightly. Ethan turned around. He couldn't look anymore. He started back toward the cruiser, boots crunching the gravel. "Let's go, Ranger." No sound behind him. He turned. Ranger was still there. Still lying by the door. Not moving. Not obeying. Just listening. Ethan stared at him for a long time, every instinct screaming to go back, but instead, he said nothing. Just climbed into the driver's seat, shut the door, and left. In the rear-view mirror, the factory faded into the night. But Ranger stayed in the frame longer than it should have been possible, and something in Ethan told him the dog would be there, still, come morning, waiting for someone to listen. The morning after the storm broke cold and glass gray, the kind of morning that muted everything, even traffic. Ethan Cole sat behind the wheel of his cruiser, parked half a block from the precinct. He had no destination. The city hadn't assigned him anything. He hadn't asked for a shift. Still, there he was, uniform half-buttoned, coffee cooling in the cup holder, radio off. He hadn't slept. His thoughts looped. Ranger lying at the threshold of the factory, unmoving, unblinking. That look, that refusal. And Ethan had walked away. He hated himself for it. He reached for the coffee, took a sip, then stopped mid-motion. Something caught his eye in the side mirror. A figure, hooded, slipping past the line of parked cars. He leaned forward. It was a child, small frame, moving fast but careful. She kept close to the curb like she'd done this before. Her head was down, her steps sharp. Then she veered, straight toward his cruiser. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his holster, not because she looked threatening, she didn't, but because the behavior didn't make sense. The girl reached the passenger door, looked up once, just once. Brown eyes, too big for her face, too tired for her age. Then she reached into her pocket and pressed something between the window and the weather strip, a folded scrap of paper. Ethan opened the door fast. "Hey, wait." But she was gone. Down the alley behind the bakery, swallowed by bricks and early sun. He didn't chase her, not because he didn't want answers, because he already had one. He pulled the paper free. It was damp at the edges, folded tight. His thumb hesitated before opening it. 6 words, written in pencil, crooked, shaky. The children cry beneath the floor. Ethan's breath left him in a short exhale. He read it again, and again. He didn't move for almost a full minute. His fingers gripped the note like it might dissolve. The words crawled under his skin, sharp and slow. The children cry beneath the floor. He looked up toward the east side, toward the outline of the factory just visible above the rooftops. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a prank. It was confirmation. He didn't know the girl's name, didn't need to. What mattered was that someone had trusted him with the truth, and he had walked away from it. His hand went to the passenger seat. No Ranger. He hadn't brought him this morning. Didn't think he had the right. The silence in the car deepened. He remembered Ranger's stillness, the single paw on the threshold, the long exhale, the bark that wasn't a warning but a call. He had been trying to tell Ethan this all along. Ethan ran a hand down his face, the guilt starting to settle in his chest like weight. He started the car, not fast, steady. The factory was still cordoned off, the tape fluttering like tired streamers. The side panel hadn't been touched since the night he left, or maybe someone had made sure it looked that way. He parked across the street, got out. Ranger wasn't there, not physically, but somehow Ethan felt him anyway. He walked up to the door, didn't knock, just stood there. He knelt down and placed his hand against the metal, cold. Then a sound, a thud, not loud, not urgent, but real. A second one followed, then a pause, then 3 sharp taps in quick succession. Ethan froze. It was real. He stepped back. The ground looked the same, but his eyes were different now. He saw what Ranger had seen. Details. Scrape marks along the door frame. A faint drag path in the gravel, like something heavy had been pushed, then pulled. He pulled out his phone, snapped a picture of the note, then dialed. It rang once. "Rivera," said the voice on the other end, groggy. "It's Cole. I need a favor. Quiet." A pause. "What kind of quiet?" "Federal kind. No local dispatch. No chatter." Another pause. "I'm listening. I have a message. From a child. And I believe we have at least one, maybe more, being held beneath the black stone factory. Someone tried to cover it, but they missed a piece, and a kid trusted me with a warning. We need eyes on every freight schedule, utility panel, and underground access within a 10-block radius." "You're sure?" "I wasn't," Ethan said, "but my dog was, and now I am. I'll call in favors. Don't log it through standard channels." "I won't." Ethan hung up, then walked around to the side of the building. Kneeling near the same panel where Ranger had stiffened before, he laid his hand on the ground, closed his eyes, and for a moment, if he let his breathing slow, he could almost feel it too. Something below, waiting, still crying. Ranger had known all along. Ethan stood. He wasn't walking away again. The cruiser pulled up to the old Blackstone factory in silence. No sirens, no lights. Just the low idle of the engine and the quiet breath of a man who knew he had to make something right. Ethan stepped out into the misty dawn. The kind of light that made everything look faded, like the town hadn't quite woken up yet. Behind him, Ranger leapt from the back seat, his body hitting the pavement with silent precision. He didn't wait for a command. He didn't need one. He knew why they were here. Ethan let the leash hang loose, letting Ranger lead. For a moment, he just watched the dog move. Nose low, posture tight, head turning as if tuning into a frequency Ethan still couldn't hear. They crossed the muddy lot, the factory looming ahead. Rust clung to the siding, and the air smelled faintly of wet concrete and old secrets. The chain-link fence had been cut, probably by whoever had been using the building. That detail stung a little harder now. He should have seen it sooner. But Ranger had. Ethan knelt beside the dog near the entrance. "I didn't listen, partner," he said softly. "You tried to show me, and I pushed you away. That's on me." Ranger tilted his head slightly, ears pricking, eyes steady. Then, without waiting, he moved. Not toward the front door. He veered left, toward the warped metal hatch that had been bolted into the side of the building, the one Ethan had overlooked the night of the storm. Ranger reached the hatch, nose pressed to the seam, and gave one short bark. Not a warning, a call. Ethan caught up. His flashlight beam swept across the ground. There, beneath the grime and dust, a faint groove in the concrete. Something had been dragged recently. Ranger circled the hatch once, then pawed at the edge with purpose. Ethan dropped to one knee. "Hold on." He ran his fingers along the lip of the hatch. No lock, just rust and stubborn metal. He wedged his pry bar into the gap and leaned hard. The hatch creaked open, groaning like something resentful being woken up. A rush of cold, damp air rose from the darkness beneath. Ranger backed up, tail low, body stiff. His eyes didn't blink. Then it came, knocking, faint but unmistakable. Knuckle to wood, knuckle to hope. Ethan froze. He dropped flat, pressed his ear to the opening. Another knock, then a pause, then two more. He looked at Ranger, whose body was tense but not shaking. His nose twitched once. Then he stepped forward and sat beside the hole, pressing his paw to the edge, gently, like he was saying, "Here, here, this is where they are." It was no longer theory, no longer instinct. It was fact, and Ranger had led him to it. Ethan reached for his radio, then hesitated. He looked at the dog beside him, at the way Ranger didn't blink, didn't move. "I believe you now," Ethan whispered. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you." Ranger didn't respond with sound. He just shifted closer, resting his body against Ethan's leg, his eyes locked on the dark hole. The knocks returned. Faster now. Louder. Like someone had heard their chance arrive. Ethan keyed the mic on his shoulder. "This is Lieutenant Cole. I need immediate backup at Blackstone Factory. I've confirmed sounds from below the structure. Possible victims. Send medics and request forensics on standby. Repeat, this is real." Dispatch barely finished acknowledging before Ethan was back at the hatch. He swept his light down. There was a narrow staircase carved into the concrete, moss clinging to the sides. Damp steps, slick with mold. The space narrowed fast, clearly not built for foot traffic. A service tunnel, maybe, or something worse. Ranger leaned forward, body tense, nose twitching. "You want to go first, don't you?" Ethan said quietly. Ranger glanced at him, then back at the stairs. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just went, one step, then another. Slow, measured, his body shifted like a shadow. Ethan followed, flashlight bouncing against the walls, the damp smell thickening with every step. The tunnel turned sharply, then opened slightly. Bare concrete walls, a low ceiling, and doors. 3 of them. Wooden. Reinforced. With slats cut into the center. Holding cells. Ranger stopped at the first one, his nose pressed to the bottom. He sniffed once, then sat, pressed both paws to the floor and lowered his head. Ethan moved in, flashlight to the slat. Inside, movement. Small. A girl. Maybe 8, eyes wide, knees drawn to her chest. She blinked at the light, then at Ranger. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes did. They lit up. Ranger didn't move. He held her gaze the way only a dog could. Calm, steady, without expectation. And the girl reached her hand through the slat. Tiny fingers, trembling. Ranger leaned forward and pressed his nose to her fingertips. The touch barely happened. But it was enough. A sob escaped the girl's throat, muffled by fear, but real. Ethan stepped back. He pulled the crowbar from his belt again and began prying at the lock. One door, then another. Inside were children, some awake, some barely conscious, none of them screaming. They had forgotten how. But Ranger remembered for them. He moved from cell to cell, not barking, not lunging, just being there. Present. A calm heartbeat in the middle of terror. When the first uniformed officer arrived, Ethan didn't speak right away. He was crouched by one of the children, a boy no older than 6 who had wrapped his arms around Ranger's neck and wasn't letting go. "He found them," Ethan said quietly. "Not me. Him." The officer knelt. "Your dog?" "No," Ethan said. "My partner." He looked at Ranger, who didn't turn, didn't move. He just stayed still, letting the child believe even for a moment that the world was safe again. And for the first time in days, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, it would be. The bolt cutters clanged sharply as Ethan snapped the rusted chain off the old maintenance hatch. The warehouse stood silent behind them, the wide concrete shell of a building that once roared with machines now sagging under the weight of its secrets. The place had been dormant for years. Everyone assumed it was just another abandoned relic of the town's shuttered past. But something always felt off, especially to Ranger. The German shepherd paced in tight arcs behind Ethan, nose to the cracked cement, body taut with something deeper than alertness. Grief, maybe. Whatever it was, it had kept him rooted to this spot for the last 20 minutes, pawing at the floor until Ethan finally called in backup. Detective Rhonda Chen and Officer Kevin Marshall flanked Ethan now, their flashlights piercing the darkness inside the hatch. The air was cooler down here, almost wet and thick with the kind of silence that hummed in the bones. The tunnel beneath the hatch was barely tall enough to stand. Old pipes lined the concrete walls, corroded and leaking in places, a musty cocktail of mildew and rot rising with every step. "Ranger, heel," Ethan said quietly, though the dog was already right at his side, each paw fall precise. They moved slowly, the tunnel snaking deeper under the old warehouse. Every footstep echoed longer than it should have. Ethan could feel it, the tension gathering like a storm just beyond the next bend. Ranger froze first. Just ahead, a rotted wooden door hung slightly ajar. Ranger's ears pressed flat. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. Instead, a low, mournful whine rose in his chest. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Ethan raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. Then, gently, he pushed the door open. The room inside was black, the kind of black that didn't just obscure, it swallowed. Rhonda swung her flashlight across the space, and the beam landed on the first chair. It was metal. Bolted to the floor, leather straps hung limp from the armrests. Next to it, another chair. This one had a chain looped around the base, and then another. 7 chairs in total, each different, none meant for comfort. The walls were lined with shelves, old tools, wires, small plastic bins. In the corner sat a rusted refrigerator, its door ajar, a dried smear of something dark curling down from the edge. A single bulb hung from the ceiling by exposed wires. Dead. Kevin stepped closer, his face pale. Jesus! On the floor, Ethan spotted something small. A child's sneaker, blue, frayed, untied. Ranger sniffed it gently, then whimpered and backed away. He turned in a slow circle, his body low, tail tucked, not out of fear, but out of a quiet, reverent ache. "He knew," Rhonda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He brought us right here." Ethan crouched beside one of the chairs, his stomach turned. Scorch marks, scratches. Blood. It wasn't just an old maintenance space. This was a holding room. No, more than that. This was a prison. A torture chamber. "Check the back wall," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice even. Behind a row of discarded filing cabinets, they found another door, this one newer, reinforced steel. No handle on the outside. It took Kevin and a crowbar nearly 10 minutes to pry it open. Inside, a narrow hallway opened into a hidden room. This one was cleaner. Too clean. Fresh sheets on a cot, a sink, a space heater, bottled water stacked in the corner, and cameras. 3 of them, small black lenses tucked into the corners of the ceiling. Wires led to a recording unit on a desk. Ethan flipped it on. No power, but the hard drive was intact. He turned to Rhonda. "Get forensics down here, and someone from missing persons." It hit all at once. The layout, the rooms, the sequence of spaces. They weren't just storing people down here. They were living off of them. Ranger moved again, slow and purposeful, to the far side of the room. He sniffed along the baseboards, then froze near a pile of blankets. He pawed once, then twice. A trapdoor. It took 2 of them to lift it. Beneath, a narrow shaft descended into pitch darkness. A ladder led down, and a smell hit them. Sweat, urine, something else. They didn't need to climb down to understand. "Jesus Christ," Kevin muttered, backing away. Ranger sat at the edge, head tilted toward the void. His eyes held that same ancient sadness, but now there was something else in them too. Resolve. He had seen too much war to be surprised by cruelty. But this was worse. Because it was hidden in plain sight, because it preyed on the voiceless, because no one had listened until a dog refused to let it go. Ethan swallowed hard, then looked at Ranger. "Let's finish what you started," he said. And for the first time in weeks, Ranger wagged his tail, just once. But it was enough. The morning after the basement discovery was colder than usual, though the temperature hadn't changed. Haverly felt different. Every corner of the town, every creak of a floorboard, every glance from a neighbor now carried suspicion. Ethan stood on the porch of the station, staring at the horizon like it might offer an answer he hadn't yet found. Ranger sat beside him, motionless. His gaze wasn't on the streets. It was fixed on the steeple of St. Emmanuel's, the old white church with ivy crawling up its bricks. Inside the briefing room, Captain Munro laid out the photos, metal shackles, the blood stains, the scratched initials in the cement. Ethan watched the reactions. Shock, revulsion. But something else caught his eye. Officer Ryan, the youngest on the team, sharp, clean-cut, recently transferred from a nearby county. He was usually engaged, eager. Today, he looked pale, his hands clasped tight in front of him, jaw tense. And when Munro mentioned the name Helen Cross, Ryan blinked too many times. Helen Cross was Heverley's patron saint in pearls, widow of the former mayor, founder of the Little Light Foundation, the very church-based group that claimed to care for troubled children. She hosted town fundraisers, prayed on Sundays with righteous fervor, and had a way of remembering everyone's birthday. Nobody wanted to believe she could be involved in anything dark. But Ethan had long learned that kindness without scrutiny was dangerous. As they prepped to move in for questioning, Ethan leaned over to Dana. "Watch Ryan," he whispered. Ranger was already ahead of them, his body language shifting. His steps were slower than usual, but his head tilted slightly toward Ryan's direction. A low growl, more like a warning hum, stirred deep in his chest. Dana narrowed her eyes. "You think he knows something?" "I think he's been told not to," Ethan said, "or paid not to." The team rolled out in 2 SUVs. As they neared the church, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. The building stood tall like a beacon of moral certainty, but inside that steeple, rot had likely taken root. Helen met them on the steps with a smile too polished for the moment. "Officers," she said warmly, "to what do I owe this early visit?" "Just need to ask a few questions, ma'am," Munro said, his tone flat. "I heard about the children." She nodded, hand to her chest. "Devastating, absolutely heartbreaking, but surely you don't think they were connected to this place?" Her eyes flicked to the stained glass windows, the cross above the door. "Would you mind if we had a look around?" Ethan asked. Helen hesitated, just a flicker, and then waved her hand. "Of course. Please. Anything I can do to help?" They split up. Ethan took Ranger toward the back. It didn't take long. Ranger's nose picked up something behind the altar, a faint scent of ammonia. Fear, old sweat masked by too much incense. There was a locked cabinet. Ranger whined. Ethan signaled Munro. "We need this open." While Munro retrieved the tools, Dana approached him, whispering, "Ryan just stepped outside to take a call, said it was personal. You buy that?" Ethan didn't. He followed, quiet, Ranger at his heel. Ryan wasn't outside. He was in his cruiser, passenger door open, phone to his ear, and he was shaking. Ethan moved fast, yanked the door open. Ryan flinched, dropping the phone, but it was too late. Ethan had already heard enough. "No, I didn't tell them. I swear. I did what you said." Ranger growled, low and guttural. Not aggressive, disappointed. Ryan's face went ghost white. "Tell me you didn't know what was happening down there," Ethan said. "Tell me you didn't know about those kids." I didn't know it was that bad," Ryan choked. "I was told it was just a place to scare them straight. They said they were runaways, troubled. I didn't think—" "You didn't think, period," Ethan snapped. "You don't get to wear this badge and look the other way." Ryan buried his face in his hands. Back inside, they'd cracked the cabinet. Inside files, names, photos, notes in a neat feminine script. Placements, punishments, referrals. Most bore a seal from the Little Light Foundation. Some had been approved by Helen herself. Ethan's stomach turned. It wasn't just hidden, it was organized. When Helen was brought in, she didn't weep. didn't deny. She just looked tired. "They were lost children," she said quietly. "Their parents gave up on them. I was trying to help." "Help?" Monroe's voice rose. "You chained them to chairs. You starved them." "They were broken," she replied, eyes shining with some warped sense of duty. "Sometimes things need to be broken further before they can be healed." Outside, Ryan sat on the curb, head down, while Ranger stood beside him. Not judging, just there. Because sometimes a dog doesn't bark, he just listens. And sometimes that's worse. The town would learn that not every monster hides in the shadows. Some wear crosses and bake casseroles. Some greet you with warm smiles and leave no fingerprints. And sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from across enemy lines, but from the seat beside you. That night, Ranger lay quietly at Ethan's feet as the team debriefed. The pain of betrayal weighed heavy, but the work wasn't done. Ethan looked at the list in his hand. 6 more names. Children still missing. "We're not finished," he said softly, fingers brushing Ranger's fur. Ranger didn't move, but his ears twitched. He was listening. Ranger wouldn't stop pacing. All night he'd been tense, restless, his paws clicking across the hardwood floor, tail stiff, ears pricked toward the distance. Ethan had tried everything to calm him. Water, food, a soft command. But the dog's focus was absolute. Ranger wasn't nervous. He was ready. The moment came at 2:47 a.m. Ranger lifted his head, let out one sharp breath, and trotted to the door without a sound. Ethan barely had time to grab his coat and badge before Ranger was already halfway to the Jeep, eyes locked on something Ethan couldn't see, but he trusted it, like always. "Where are we going, buddy?" Ethan muttered, turning the ignition. Ranger didn't respond. Just sat still in the passenger seat, staring east toward the old rail yard. 10 minutes later, the fog swallowed them whole. The tracks behind the abandoned textile mill had long since disappeared from any modern map. But the whispers they'd heard during the investigation, half-statements from frightened teens, rumors buried in police reports, had led Ethan here once before. And now it was Ranger confirming it. They moved on foot after parking beneath a stand of firs. Ranger took point, nose low, body tight. Ethan followed with one hand on his sidearm, the other brushing the cold grip of his radio. He hadn't called for backup. Not yet. Not without proof. But 20 yards in, that changed. Ranger stopped cold, one paw raised. Ethan followed his gaze. An old freight container sat crooked beside the tracks. Its metal walls were tagged in layers of graffiti and rust, but the padlock on the side door was new. Thick, commercial grade, not the kind you'd use on scrap. And above it, faintly visible in the mist, a red symbol was painted in chalk. Same one they'd seen in the basement of the church. "Jesus," Ethan whispered, reaching for his radio. But Ranger's low growl cut through the silence like a fuse. Movement inside, a scrape, a muffled voice, and then a scream, small, terrified, cut short. Ranger didn't wait. With a sudden burst, he lunged toward the container, slamming his body against the door. Ethan rushed forward, heart pounding. He dropped to one knee, pistol drawn, as a man's voice barked something from inside. Harsh, angry, foreign. Then the door cracked open. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, armed, eyes flashing in the dim light. He froze when he saw Ethan, but it was too late. Ranger was already airborne. The dog hit the man full force in the chest, jaws locked around his gun arm. The weapon fired once into the dirt before skittering away. Ethan dove, pinned the man's free hand to the ground, and cuffed him while Ranger held tight. A second shout erupted from inside the container. 2 more men. But this time, Ethan was ready. "Federal agent," he yelled. "Drop your weapons." One ran. The other raised a crowbar, until Ranger was on him too, fast as a bullet. The man went down screaming, his wrist caught in a vice grip of teeth and fury. Ethan chased the runner, catching him behind a stack of rotted pallets with his hands raised and breath coming in ragged gasps. By the time the fog settled, 3 men were in cuffs. But what Ethan found inside that container would haunt him for years. 20 children, chained, gagged, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The youngest couldn't have been older than 5. One of them, a girl with dirt-streaked cheeks and ripped overalls, reached out and touched Ranger's flank. "You came," she whispered. Ranger sat down, gently licking her hand. The first FBI team arrived 6 minutes later, summoned by Ethan's urgent call. By then, Ranger was already moving again, nose working the air. He led them to a second container down the tracks. Inside, they found maps, burner phones, stacks of documents and photographs, hundreds of them of children from towns across the region. It wasn't just this group. It was a network, and someone had gone to great lengths to protect it. Later, as dawn broke over the town, Captain Monroe stood at the site, arms crossed, staring at the container with tight lips and hollow eyes. Ethan approached, brushing dirt from his knees. "We almost missed it," he said. Monroe nodded, but he didn't. They both looked at Ranger, lying calmly beside one of the children as a paramedic checked her vitals. That dog wasn't just a tracker. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a sentinel, and this time he'd brought 20 lives back from the edge. "You know what this means," Monroe said. "We need to go higher. This wasn't just local." Ethan didn't answer. He was watching Officer Ryan, standing at a distance, arms stiff, lips pressed thin. There was something in his eyes. Guilt. Maybe fear. Ranger noticed, too. His ears perked, his body tensed. Ethan followed the line of his gaze. "Not over yet," he said. "Not by a long shot." 6 months after the raid, the building was nothing but rubble. The old warehouse, the one where so many had suffered silently, its walls once thick with the weight of secrets, was gone. In its place, beams of light spilled through open scaffolding, children's laughter now echoing where screams once died. The town had voted unanimously, demolish the site, erase the darkness. But Ethan had a different vision. Not erasure. Redemption. They called it Ranger's Haven now, and from the minute it opened, people knew this wasn't just another non-profit. It was a promise. An old shipping container had been preserved at the center, cleaned, painted white inside, with soft lighting and framed drawings from the very kids who'd once been trapped there. One sketch stood out, a German shepherd drawn in thick black crayon, nose pressed to a locked door. Below it, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "He didn't bark. He listened." That image became the heart of Ranger's Haven. Every morning, without fail, the real Ranger lay just outside the main gate, his graying muzzle resting between his paws, his eyes scanning the courtyard like a sentinel. His joints were slower now, his hearing not as sharp, but his presence still commanding, still sacred. Children stopped to greet him before they went in for art therapy, trauma support, or even just a warm meal. Some sat beside him in silence, drawing strength from the only creature who had found them when no one else heard their cries. "He knows," one girl whispered one day, running her fingers along the scar on Ranger's side. "He remembers." Ethan stood nearby, arms crossed, watching them. He wasn't sure if she meant the warehouse, or the men, or something deeper. Either way, she was right. Ranger did remember. So did Ethan. He remembered what it felt like to see 20 children shackled together in the dark, to hear Ranger's growl cut through the silence, and know, without hesitation, that they were seconds from death if they didn't act. He remembered the gunshot that missed him by inches, and he remembered the moment Ranger launched himself between him and the trafficker's second bullet. It had been close. Too close. But thanks to Ranger and a tip from a homeless teen who only trusted a dog with haunted eyes, the FBI moved in just in time. The case shook the county, shook the state. 10 arrests, 2 national investigations, and the biggest underground trafficking ring in the Northwest had been crushed under the paws of a dog who didn't know how to quit. Yet none of that made headlines. What made headlines was a photo taken the morning after the rescue. Ranger, covered in ash and blood, sitting on the steps outside the warehouse, one paw resting on the shoulder of a little boy named Kai. The boy clutched a torn sketchbook. Ranger stared straight into the camera, as if daring the world to look away. That image, haunting and defiant, funded Ranger's haven in less than a month. Donors came in droves. Volunteers flooded in. Therapists, counselors, retired soldiers, dog handlers. Even Marcus, the man who once tried to break Ranger, came back, clean, quiet, and different. He built the training course behind the center, teaching rescued teens how to work with canines. No one brought up the past. They just watched the way Ranger would still approach Marcus slowly, then sit beside him without fear. It was enough. Ethan stepped to the podium on opening day, microphone in hand. Ranger sat at his feet, watching the crowd with calm, unblinking eyes. "You know, when I first met him," Ethan said, voice steady, "he didn't bark, he didn't growl, he didn't chase, he just watched, and he listened." He paused. "And that's why this place exists, because before any of us heard those kids, he did." The crowd stood in silence. Some cried, some clapped. Most just looked at the dog beside him, the dog who had, in his own quiet way, forced them all to stop pretending. Ethan crouched down, running a hand along the fur that was now speckled with white. Ranger closed his eyes and leaned into the touch. He heard them first. Ethan said again, softer this time. Then, glancing up into the crowd, "What about you? What's your story with a loyal companion?" The sun rose behind them, light spilled across the courtyard, catching on the bronze plaque near the entrance. "This place listens," just like he did. And so it began. A new chapter, a place where pain didn't get buried, but faced. Where kids who had every reason to give up learned to trust again. And at the center of it all, a weathered German shepherd who never needed words to understand who was hurting. He just listened. If you've ever had a dog like that, a partner, a protector, a silent hero, we want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And if Ranger moved you, hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories like his out there. We're just beginning to listen.